just to do a quick refresh on step 1, we're looking for obsession, powerlessness, craving, okay, and unmanageability. We want to see in real time how this chemical or process is affecting our life. That's really what we're looking at in step 1. Step 1 is to look at it matter-of-factly as it is. Okay, that's all we're trying to do is understand that yes, we have a problem with this thing. Okay, yes, I have a problem with alcohol, or yes, it's drugs, whatever the problem is. Okay, so moving into step 2 and step 3, before we go any too much further, I'm just going to introduce a topic called the ego. Okay, now most people by now have heard about the ego a lot. Okay, now I am not an expert on it, and frankly, the more I read about it and listen about it, the more I realize I don't know, right? So this is where it's going to be a very basic, just so that we can try to understand what's happening in our brain as we try to move forward away from the problem and into the solution, okay? Because that's the one thing why we're bringing up ego now, is because ego will want to stay in the problem. Ego likes the problem. The problem is comfortable, right? The ego's comfort, it's comfortable in pain, chaos, instability. So if you ever wonder why some of us can do things like which are pretty extraordinary if you consider how much drugs and or drinking we have been doing prior to accomplishing those things. But see, this is because my ego likes it. It keeps life simple. This stuff always comes down to survive, right? Survival. So if I'm in my pain, chaos, and instability, everything I do is about survival, okay? Because I'm coming from it from a perspective of the victim. I'm coming out of my own victimization at the hand of a chemical and at the hand of other people who are associated with that chemical and other chemicals, okay? So we're not just trying to get into perspective the stuff we consumed, but also the lifestyle we consumed, right? Because the lifestyle is going to become important as we move forward. So we're doing this here after step 1 because once we move into step 2 and 3, we're out of the problem. We're not living in the alcoholism or the addiction. Hopefully. The idea is to move out of the problem. Now, it's going to pull us back all the time, but the idea is to understand the ego enough so we can pull ourselves out and keep moving forward, right? So the ego is basically, it is our mediator. Okay? Reality, fantasy, and it gives us our sense of self. Okay? So you can see how an unhealthy ego, now I am obviously combining lots of different ideas on ego into one here. So again, I encourage you all to look it up for yourselves, find a definition that works for you. What we're trying to do is realize that this thing in our brain is the problem, right? So we want to go outside of that in order to get out of the problem. So in order to get out of the problem, we have to get out of the way. We have to get out of the way, right? If we can get out of the way, and that's what this is, the ego's in the way. Okay, so ego is pride. Some of you will be able to understand pride, envy, jealousy. They sound very much like deadly sins of some kind. But we're not really going to focus on the sin of things. We're just looking at, here's what the ego is operating from when I came in. Okay, my unhealthy ego is operating out of pride, envy, jealousy, greed. Okay, what's the vanity? That's it. Vanity. What other ones are there? There's vanity. I don't know. Anyway, you can all look it up. Whatever, if you can imagine the 7 deadly sins, I can't even remember that right now. It's driving me nuts. Pride, envy, jealousy, greed. those things are usually what we use to defend ourselves, right? Dishonesty will come out in that, because the dishonesty is oftentimes at self, right? The dishonesty and the ego can be with self. Because once we're dishonest with self, we can then be dishonest with other people without even thinking about it, right? Once I believe the lie, okay, denial is a nice mechanism of the ego and the brain. So once I believe the lie, then I can continue without interruption, right? Hence, I want to get out of the way, okay? So we're trying to get our egos out of the way, our selfishness out of the way. And how some people do that in the 12-step groups, we do it through step 2, step 3. Okay? So step 2 is about building belief. Okay? Belief in something. Now, of course, in the 12-step groups, they usually use the word God, which is fine. If you believe in God and have no issues with God, go for it. Utilize God. Belief in something that can save us, right? So something. It could be, for lots of people that I've worked with, it's the room. When they go into a 12-step room, that's their higher power. When they go out and they work with others, they're working with their higher power, that kind of stuff. But there's not necessarily a deity in charge. Doesn't have to be a specific deity or any, for that matter. Okay? So what we're trying to do here, though, remember, is eventually we're going to get out of the way. Okay? So what do we need to get out of the way? If God works for you, fantastic. We don't even have to worry about it. If you have some things that stand in the way of connecting to God, some of those things might be what? What might be in the way of connecting with God, Darcy?
Ego.
Yeah, ego's definitely in the way, you bet.
Just negative past experiences.
Yeah, negative history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a negative outlook altogether as far as how could there possibly be a higher power with all the crap in the world, you know.
Yeah, negative outlook, cynicism. For sure. So some people, I've heard this sometimes in the rooms. I shouldn't say I've heard it in the rooms, I've heard it from individuals in the rooms talking about your negative history with God. That whatever you do, your negative history needs to be overcome and you need to find a God to believe in. But that's not true for everybody, okay? That is not true for everybody. Now, look, I believe in God, but I have no idea what God is, okay? So people ask me, I just kind of get a blank look on my face because I'm like, well, I know there's a God, but I have no idea how to describe it to you because it all sounds hokey and like bullshit when I talk about it. But I believe it in my heart and I feel it as real. So that's all that really matters. Through this negative history, it is unreasonable to expect lots of people to just go, oh yeah, fine, God's fine, right? Because what we're not looking at when we talk about negative history, we're not looking at trauma. And we're not understanding that there are people who have been absolutely traumatized who will never walk into a church. And nor should they. Nor do they need to, right? So this is the idea. We want to create something that works for everybody, regardless of whether they believe in a deity or not, because you don't have to. Honestly, the principles of this program, like other programs of its type, whether it be a religion or a theology or whatever, it's really trying to get us in the flow of nature, right? And whether they say that's what those things are about, I don't care. To me, that's how they read. They read like trying to get me in the flow of nature, okay, of the universe, how things are moving, how they're actually working, not how I wish they were working, so I try to force it, right? So coming here, step 2, we don't have to have a huge awakening here. We don't have to say, oh my God, if I don't believe in God, I'm done. That is not necessary, right? What we want to be willing to do here is to get out of the way, okay? Step 2 and 3 are about getting out of the way. Even if you don't let even if you don't surrender to some deity or some higher power, for example, and you simply look at the program that you're involved in as being a possible program to save your life, that might be good enough for now, right? Or you just maybe simply have to get out of the way. Some people are good at getting out of the way and they don't need this necessarily like I did, and like I still do from time to time, to get out of the way. But as time goes on, things change, right? Okay, so step 2 is about believing in something that's going to restore us to sanity, right? So it has to be something, it has to work for you. It has to work for you, okay? If somebody tells you to go to church, but you have no intention of going to church, it's not going to work for you, right? So that's basically what I'm getting at. It just has to work for you, okay? So step 3, and out of step 2, you're going to examine your history. You're going to figure out if you have any blocks to this, like if there's a block to faith or a block to belief, you can examine that block. You can decide whether that block is worthy to stay or needs to go, right? Totally up to you. This process isn't pointing towards one God or another, okay? It's basically pointing all the way through to get us out of the way. Us being the one, in my case, the one who couldn't stop drinking. It's for me to get out of the way so I can not drink, right? And that's, I think, probably as simple as I can put that. And it's still being accurate. So step 3 really comes down to building faith. And how do we build faith? Over time, by making different choices. Okay? Now, in the 12-step programs, this is a prayer. This prayer is a very good prayer. It's a lofty prayer. The prayer is, God, I offer myself to you, to build with me and to do with me as you will. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do your will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of your power, your love, your way of life. May I do your will always. Amen. So that's the step 3 prayer. What we're trying to do with that prayer, okay? So God, I offer myself. We're surrendering, okay? And I understand surrendering is a tough word. Most of us don't like doing it. I certainly don't want to admit that I've done it. But I have, and I continue to do it in order to get out of the way, okay? This is what it's all about. So we surrender, but we don't have to surrender to some deity. Okay, we just surrender to the fact that maybe we can't drink. Surrender again to that fact. Surrender that your life, the way you were living it, isn't working. Okay? We have to surrender to something here. Okay? We're surrendering ourselves, our patterns, whatever it is. Okay? So we can say the prayer, because there's absolutely nothing wrong with prayer. We can meditate, if you're not into prayer. But if you're not into meditation or prayer, you can do whatever you want. Just make decisions. Make decisions that are healthier. If you get out of the way, when your brain's telling you to pick up, but you get out of the way and you can make a decision, you don't. This is going to really be easier if you have people to talk to. Okay? Call someone. Okay? Sometimes faith is built by listening to other people and their stories, and watching them recover as a good example as well. Sometimes it's going to come by watching, okay? But you're also going to have to participate. So at some point, we're going to have to get out of the way here again, right? So again, it's all about getting out of the way. If your answer is selfish, okay, if what you're thinking of is selfish, maybe keep looking for the non-selfish answer. Okay? Now, obviously, I am simplifying that because the reality is, if you believe and you pray and you're good with that, this is going to be a little bit easier, this part of the process. But if you don't do any of that, it's okay. Try not to get too bummed out about it. The reality is, this is where CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, will really come into play. You could even turn your step 2 and 3 into your visualization, your breathing, your reframing. That's what we're talking about here. This is trying to reframe the future without knowing what that is. Okay, so 2 and 3 were reframing what the future might look like without knowing what the future is. Now I know that sounds really heady, and I appreciate it if you're still here listening after that. So step 2 and 3, they're not. We just want to make sure that I want to make sure that I'm not limiting people from using this, right? Because to me, there's no limit. Now, when I came in with step 2 and 3 here, I'll leave this up for a second. So when I first came in, I didn't believe in anything. I didn't believe in a God. Well, if I did believe in God, I was pretty sure He hated me. So I didn't spend a whole lot of time worrying about step 2 and 3. I stayed on step 1 for as long as I could. In my case, it was like 3 years and a bit. So it was a long time. But that's because I had a lot of blockages, a lot of blockades with belief and the structure of God. Eventually, I simply stayed long enough, and then I started working and realizing that the unseen world is much larger than the seen world, right? That the unseen is much more dynamic, is much more difficult to understand, to comprehend, and so I'm not even going to try and pretend that I know what that looks like. Okay, so that's where this can sometimes get people stuck, is because we think we have to know what God looks like, or it has to be a certain kind of God. It doesn't, right? There are many pathways to that same end, right? And I just hope that each of you finds the best ones that work for you, right? I know what works for me, and that is practicing prayer and meditation. And my prayers are not to a specific God, like I just don't do that anymore, but they don't have to be. Because I believe this process, as people might find argument with this, which is perfectly fine, you can argue with whatever you like, but I believe what's happened in my life is the transition of finding God then moved me into finding God with no name. Because the God that I found in this program is so big that there's no name, right? It's too big. It's probably a combination of things, but it's too big for me to name or articulate, and I've yet to hear the name. So I'm just going to keep going with the fact that when we surrender here, we're not surrendering to a God, okay? We surrender to the process of recovery. How about that, right? Surrender to the process of recovery, because the universe is at work trying to move itself forward. Right? It's always expanding and continuously expanding, just as we are, right? Just as humankind is. Now, this time in our history is not the best time to look at us, right? But it's also not the worst time, right? Because we've had some pretty bad times in the past. So I think we're doing probably a little better. We're doing a little better, we're a little more advanced. So we haven't quite blown up the planet yet. So anyway, step 2 and 3, if you got trouble with the God stuff, don't worry about God stuff. Okay, this is the process. We're trying to get out of the way. If you can utilize cognitive behavioral therapy, I encourage you to do that, and that is cognitive behavioral, this is an American spelling, cognitive behavioral therapy. Okay, so look that up. When you, at any point in time throughout the process of working through these steps, I encourage you to look up cognitive behavioral therapy. I encourage you to look up dialectical behavioral therapy. I'll try to spell it. Yep, I got it. Electical. And here's one for our English friends, or French friends. Behavioral therapy. Or is that the Queen Zone English?
I think that's the Queen thing.
That's the Queen Zone?
Yeah.
There you go, Queenie Boo. All right, so look these up. But also, if you have questions about like spiritual stuff and this process, get in touch with people who've worked through it. I encourage you to talk to people of all kinds of all kinds who embrace this process. So talk to atheists if you can, agnostics. Believers, whatever that looks like to you. Talk to them, find out what this might look like for you, okay? This is a strictly more scientific approach to it, which I have seen incredible things happen, okay, through the use of these programs. And so I encourage anyone out there who's confused or conflicted, unsure, Look it up.